Hello everyone, this is Chidanand from Kratz Infotech NG. Welcome to this tutorial on VS Code integration with Git using GitHub as the Git server. This is a kind of continuation of my previous tutorial where I touched upon what is the source code version control tool, why do we need such tool, and how to use the Git client to create a repository on the client and publish it onto a Git server, and the Git server that we used was GitHub. In this tutorial, I will demonstrate how to use an IDE, an integrated development environment, or a RAD, rapid application development tool called VS Code. How to use VS Code and empower it so that it can use the underlying Git client and perform all the version control related tasks in a UI manner, which is much more simpler and easier, and use some sort of an extension or a plugin so that the code can be pushed and published onto a GitHub server. My workstation is a Windows machine on which I have Git client installed. My workstation is running Windows. I have downloaded the Windows installer for Git client, have installed it and run a couple of commands to set the configuration of user.name and user.email. Now on this machine, if at all I install an IDE like Visual Studio Code, I can possibly use that with some sort of an extensions to connect it to various Git servers. Now Visual Studio Code has got a much more tighter configuration and integration with GitHub because Visual Studio is owned by Microsoft. GitHub server is now owned by Microsoft. So because of that, there's a pretty good integration between Visual Studio Code and GitHub, which lets us not just use the extensions to perform simple version control related tasks, but there's also lots and lots of plugins which can be used to perform a lot of other GitHub related activities, including, let's say, pulling a code pull request or a code review request, publishing something onto GitHub Actions, maybe using the code spaces on GitHub. So there are a lot of plugins which allow GitHub to be operated upon using this Visual Studio Code. Now in this tutorial, I will just cover the basic aspects of performing version control related tasks using VS Code. I already have VS Code installed on my machine. So let me just bring up Visual Studio Code. Now Visual Studio Code is very powerful. Lot of integrations are pre-built into it. The integration with Git client is already pre-built. You don't need to install anything else. But then if Visual Studio Code has to talk to, let's say, GitHub, you may need some extra plugins or extensions to be installed. Similarly, Visual Studio Code has to talk to Bitbucket or GitLab. You would need to find a working plugin or an extension and then install that. All right, so Visual Studio Code, let me open up a new repository, or let me first show you what all extensions are present or installed on my Visual Studio Code. Not that you will need all of them. So you will find some authorized or official plugins from GitHub. So I have a plugin that I've installed called GitHub Pull Request. Pull request is nothing but a kind of a code review request that can be raised straight away from your IDE. Now this plugin or extension enables that. Similarly, if you know a little bit about code spaces, if you want to spin up an environment on your GitHub, you can use this particular plugin and you can do that straight away from Visual Studio Code. So there are a lot of plugins that are extensions that enable your VS Code to work very, very closely with GitHub. All right. In case you would want to work with GitLab, you will have to just look up the extension specific to GitLab and then work with them. All right. So now I have these GitHub plugins or extension that is already present. So I think any one of the GitHub extension is pretty good enough. So GitHub pull request, this is pretty good enough. In case you have that, you're all set. So let me go ahead and maybe create a folder. Okay, now I'm going to do the same exercise that I did in my previous tutorial. I will create a new folder from scratch and then convert it into a Git repository by doing a git init, and then commit some of the files, maybe text file, and then push it or integrate with GitHub and try to push it onto the GitHub server. So I'll create a new folder. I will call it VSCode hyphen demo hyphen YouTube. Okay, now this would be my repository name. I have some of these repositories already on VS Code. That is why I'm giving a particular name. I hope I don't have this already on my GitHub server. Okay, for now, this would be the repository name, or for now, just a folder. So let me go ahead and first I just created a folder, and if at all I show you here, if I refresh this, okay, now this is the folder. As good as it's a simple folder that is present, not a Git repository at all. I've already checked in this hidden items. So I can either initialize it or maybe I'll add a new file. Okay, I'll try to add a new file called maybe hello.txt. Hello from VS Code. Now ideally you would want to put in your source code, but then for the demo, right, hello from VS Code. All right, let me just save this particular file. Still a repository. I mean, it's still not a repository. It's still a plain folder structure. Now I can go to the command prompt there and run a git command and then create a repository. But then you can see how easy is it to do it from Visual Studio Code. So out here, you will find source control. So click on this. You will notice initialize a repository and publish to GitHub. Okay, for now, we'll have to first create a local repository, right? So let us initialize a repository. So that's as good as we doing a git init. If you go out here and check, you'll find this .git folder. All right, and it is telling you what files are present. Do you want to add or stage this changes? Git add dot. Okay, I want to stage this change. What is the commit message that you would want to do? Git commit -am double quote the message. Okay, so I will say first commit from VS Code. I can go ahead and commit it, and I can do a lot of other things also. Little confusing at times in the beginning. For now, let me just go and commit this particular stuff. I will notice this one commit happen on the local repository. Now I can also open up a command prompt. Okay, or this is not so good. Let me just open the git bash. cd vs code. I'm just using the git bash to just get into the same folder. Git log, one commit has happened. And if you notice here, whatever the configuration that we specified in our Git configuration, that is kind of overridden because the way VS Code operates is a little different. So it has got its own set of configurations and settings. So the repository is initialized with the main or the default branch being main. If you do this from the client, it is called master. Okay, not just it is called master because we have configured our Git client to have that as our master branch. Now, in case you want to, you can change all that stuff. That's also possible. Maybe I'll do another video on that. But now, for now, this is good enough. This is good enough. And if you see here, there's a. I mean, this is again because of some other plugins that I've installed. You can see the graph of how many commits have happened, what commit is. I mean, the relationship between different commits and all this stuff. Okay, but for now, keeping it very simple, one commit, local Git repository. We haven't added any remote or anything of that sort. So git remote -v. There's no remote added because we have not even linked it to our server in the background. So let me go ahead and try to integrate the VS Code with our GitHub server. Now GitHub server doesn't know or it doesn't authorize Visual Studio out of the box. You'll have to specify again a username, password, or maybe use an auth token for connecting the Visual Studio Code with the GitHub server. Now let me go ahead and connect our Visual Studio Code with the GitHub server. You can take a look at it. The configuration and the setup is so very intuitive. Now publish a branch. As simple as this. Or there are a couple of ways of doing this. You can also find Command Shift P, which is the palette, and then check for GitHub. Now you can publish, you can find GitHub here also, so that the publishing is there. Depending upon the plugins or the extensions that you have installed, and there are various ways of doing it. Now right here you'll see publish a branch. Okay, I'm going to publish, but then publish to which server? It could be anywhere. All right, so now the default one, or the, because we've used the extension called GitHub, it is asking me, do you really want to sign up to GitHub? All right, I would say allow. All right, now you see here it's as good as the GitHub server challenging or asking us, do you really want the Visual Studio to be authorized? Yes, this is good, this is my user ID. Okay, all right, now you see the connection happened. So a personal access token would be created, and your, from now on you can use Visual Studio Code to directly get into your account without having got to do all this thing. All right, now you see it is going to show you, look, you want to publish it, this is my ID. Under this, I told you the name has to be exactly the same way as it is on the client. So do you want to publish it as a private repository or a public repository? Public repository sounds good. If you remember my previous video, we had to manually go ahead and create one empty repository and then connect them together by adding the remote. All this is happening in the background, and VS Code is authorized not just to connect it, even go and publish a repository that possibly did not exist. Okay, now you see here VS Code demo YouTube, which was not even present on the Git server, or rather GitHub server, got created, published. This was my first commit, and if you notice, first commit from me, this is the commit message that I put in. Also, if I come back to my client here and say git remote -v, you will find the remote also added very nicely. Under the hood, all the git client and the git commands would be run, but then you don't really have to worry too much about knowing the git commands, and all that you can do is, in a very nice UI intuitive way, you can go ahead and to perform all your version control tasks using VS Code. In case at any point in time you want to log off or you want to unauthorize this VS Code for whatever reason, you can go here and you'll see here, say sign out. Now if you do this, automatically your account would be discontinued for this particular VS Code. Also on the server as well, if you go to your account detail, settings, where is this, integrations, applications, authorized auth apps. If somewhere come down here, you will find the Visual Studio Code, which is one of the authorized thing that you, when somebody's authorized your ID, in case this was us, okay, you can go ahead and revoke the tokens as well. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching my video. I hope you liked it. And in case you get stuck in any of the steps that I mentioned, kindly leave me a comment and I'll try to address it as soon as I can. Thank you so much.